Okay, so Carolina Panthers fans, how you doing? How's life? I'd imagine not great, but you know, let's go back to a simpler time. Forget about the David Tepper era, or even the Bryc Young highs and lows with Dave Canals for just a moment, and let's go back to when your quarterback was Superman himself, when your defense looked like it was unstoppable, when you had one of the greatest linebackers of all time in his prime, and winning games wasn't just a surprise, it was expected, and you know what year I'm talking about. The wonderful season of 2015, where you had it all. The culture of America itself was created by you. There was highlights from your team every single game that went viral, and it was just a one-of-a-kind season. And I don't think that there will ever be another team like the 2015 Carolina Panthers ever again. So without further ado, let's take a walk down memory lane and just, I promise, it'll be fun. It'll be fun. Let's do it. Now, when I say the 2015 Panthers came out of nowhere too, I am not being dramatic, I swear. Because the year before, they won the division with a 7-8-1 record. A losing record, and they made the playoffs. And including a 6-game losing streak too, that had Ron Rivera almost fired. But they ended up going to the playoffs and beat the Cardinals in the worst playoff game of all time. But they had pieces, and people did believe in them to at least build upon what they did in 2014. They had Cam Newton, the former first overall pick, who was already amazing, but was looking to build upon that season as well, and Luke Kuechly, who was also, like, underratedly a top 5 player in the league and the best linebacker of the modern era. But that hype was put on hold when Kelvin Benjamin, their number 1 wide receiver, tore his ACL before the season even began. So that was rough. And then even just a few days after that, Cam Newton fought Josh Norman in practice, and the video was all over the internet too, so the vibes weren't immaculate, and the media could not wait to just dunk on the Panthers, because that's what we love to do, huh? Don't we love to dunk on the Carolina Panthers, who are just the punching bag of the NFL since they basically joined the league, or at least one of the punching bags, but, you know, nobody really thought that they were going to be over 500. Sports Illustrated went one step further than even calling them a 500 team, and claimed that they would come dead last in the NFC South. But the Panthers heard all the noise and blocked it all out, as they started out the season on fire, taking out Jacksonville and Houston in the first 2 weeks. And then in week 3, Cam dropped his first 300-yard performance of the season to destroy the Saints. And then when Tampa Bay took them on in week 4, they also got obliterated as the Panthers dropped 37 points and then went into their bye week with a 4-0 record and were considered a contender out of nowhere. And remember Josh Norman, who was just kind of like a, you know, obscure cornerback? Well, that guy who tried to take Cam Newton's head off became the face of the franchise and the shutdown corner in the NFL, and ended up making this Panthers defense feared even while Luke Kuechly was injured, and the defense became one of the best units of not only this season, but of the last 10 years as well. But nobody was really super convinced yet, and why should they be? I mean, this is similar to like the Colts of this season. If a team is undefeated and hasn't really played like another contender, then how can you really judge them? But luckily, the Panthers had a date with the Legion of Boom, and the Panthers were in trouble. They were down 23-14 in the fourth quarter, and everyone seemed to be proven right that the Panthers just aren't ready yet against a team like Seattle, who just came off of 2 straight Super Bowl appearances. But then Cam Newton went from a great player who's been amazing this season to the potential MVP, and he led back-to-back touchdown drives to close out the game, come back, and steal a win with a 26-yard touchdown to his number 1 option in the old tight end Greg Olsen. And just like that, the Panthers walked out of Seattle, a place where almost no one won during this era, at 5-0. The defense bent but never broke, and Cam Newton was just demolishing people. That 5-0 record then quickly turned to 6-0 1 week later when the Philadelphia Eagles were easily thrown to the side. And then in week 8, the Indianapolis Colts, who were in peak Andrew Luck era, also were an amazing team, but were no match for the Panthers. And by no match, I mean they almost blew a 20-point lead, but they won in overtime, okay? And they just kept going and going. It was at this point where Cam Newton had become a sensation because he was dabbing all over the place. That was a thing, and He had his own TV show for some reason. But nobody could stop them. Everyone didn't like all the celebrations and the, various chest puffs, pelvic thrusts, arrogant struts, and in-your-face taunting, according to Tennessee mom. So people were not having it, but nobody could stop them. That was the problem. No one could stop the Carolina Panthers, as after a Week 11 win versus Washington, where they dropped 44 points, a season high, and just demolished them, they moved to 10-0, and this team was unquestionably the best in football. Even over the reigning Super Bowl champion New England Patriots, the Seattle Seahawks, the Denver Broncos, everyone picked the Panthers as not only the best team in the league, and not only the Super Bowl favorites, but a team that had a real shot to go 16-0. But still, because this was the Panthers, people weren't going to give them all the props in the world, because they came into a Thursday night Thanksgiving contest with the Cowboys as barely 1-point favorites, and they absolutely slaughtered them, so, of course they did, and they continued their march, because their schedule was honestly, decently easy. They played against the New Orleans Saints in Week 13 and escaped with a 3-point win. And then when they blew out the Atlanta Falcons 38-0 in Week 14, it seemed inevitable. All they had left was the Giants, the Falcons again, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who all did not have winning records. So the 16-0 season was more likely than not to occur. They had Greg Olsen, who had been great so far this season, really stepping up. Cam Newton had been unquestionably the MVP of the NFL, leading the league in touchdown percentage at 7.1, had almost 4,000 passing yards, 35 touchdowns, 10 picks. He was amazing. And then Week 16 occurred. The Atlanta Falcons were not a bad team, and as we would know 1 year later, they were catching fire at the right time. In 2016, they'd go on to win the Super Bowl and then won 7 Super Bowls straight with the most clutch quarterback of all time, Matt Ryan, but they fell just short. And everyone has seen that clip of Julio Jones mossing Luke Kuechly, who, by the way, as a linebacker, was 80 yards downfield on Julio Jones, but they fell just short, and the Falcons knocked them off from their undefeated season. But they did finish the year out 15-1, and were still the Super Bowl favorites to many. The amount of players on this team that were just absolutely elite were insane. They had 8 players from the 2015 team ranked inside the NFL's top 100 list, with Newton, Kuechly, and Norman all being in the top 11. So the underdog label was gone. This team was favored to get the job done, but they would be tested in the playoffs, because right away they faced off against the Legion of Boom Seahawks again, but they were having none of that disrespect. People thought that this championship experience would be able to overcome this lack of experience from the Panthers, but they jumped on them right away. They went up 31-0 on the defending NFC champs and didn't even let them breathe. They did end up doing a little bit of a comeback thing, as Seattle had 24 unanswered points, but this was never really a real game until later in it. But they were able to hold on, and an onside kick recovery secured the win, and the Panthers went to the NFC Championship game, where they would face the Arizona Cardinals. And this was a very good matchup, because both these teams, again, could you imagine in the modern era if the Cardinals and Panthers played in the NFC Championship game? I hope the you can't, because this was a once-in-a-generation game. But the Cardinals were not the team that they once were. They were amazing in the regular season, and sadly for them, this is their best team in franchise history, but even then, they lost Tyrann Mathieu for the season, and Carson Palmer even suffered an injury late in the regular season too, so they weren't the same team. Many thought that Palmer should have won the MVP over Newton, but he didn't prove it in this one, as the Carolina Panthers went out there and also just jumped on them right away, as Palmer had 2 fumbles and 4 interceptions in the day, including a second pick six of the postseason for Luke Kuechly. Really missed that guy. The Panthers dropped 49 points, the most ever scored by an NFC champion, and the Cardinals were cooked. And between Carolina's outrageous league-leading offense and a defense that generated takeaways for basically fun, it was hard to see anything other than a Super Bowl victory for the Panthers. Again, culturally, this team was massive. Everyone in the world knew how fun this Panthers team was, how dominant they were, and versus the Denver Broncos with a team led by Peyton Manning, who could barely throw more than 6 yards and had only managed 9 touchdowns and 17 picks in 10 games in the regular season, including the worst game a quarterback has ever played, it seemed inevitable. The time had come, as the Panthers were 5.5-point favorites, and it seemed like destiny for them to win the Super Bowl. Cam Newton was the league MVP and potentially the new face of the NFL after Tom Brady and Peyton Manning. Josh Norman had become the best cornerback in the league out of nowhere. Thomas Davis and Luke Kuechly were the best linebacker core in the league, and Thomas Davis was even playing in the Super Bowl on a broken arm, and this would be the game where the torch was passed. However, that wouldn't happen. Von Miller is unfortunately very, very good at football, and as a Raiders fan, I can say that proudly. God, he was so good, and he just decided that the Broncos were not going to lose this game, as right away his presence was felt, running off the edge on an injured backup tackle to strip Cam Newton and send the ball into the end zone. Denver fell on it, and it was a touchdown. And just like that, the momentum was shifted. Now, to be fair, the Panthers defense did a great job. They held Peyton Manning, the Broncos offense, to just 2 field goals in the first half, and in particular, defensive lineman Coney Ealy turned into prime Lawrence Taylor for the day, getting 3 sacks, an interception, and a fumble recovery, so literally one of the best defensive Super Bowl performances ever that nobody remembers, because the Panthers fell short, because the Denver Broncos defense, one of the greatest defenses of all time, unfortunately, also played well. The Panthers' ground game disappeared, and Cam Newton became human. He completed just 18 of his 41 pass attempts for 0 touchdowns and 1 interception, and the film is a lot worse too, because sadly, Cam Newton had his career-defining play in this game, and it occurred when he was stripped, the ball was on the ground, and he didn't jump on the ball. The Broncos recovered and would go on to win the Super Bowl. And the stench of this loss lingered after the game because Cam Newton did not want to talk to reporters, and understandably so. This was the worst loss of his career and the worst loss in Panthers history. That whole magical season was over in one game. They lost to a terrible fucking quarterback this season, and they were just on the wrong side of destiny. Peyton Manning walked off into the sunset with one more piece of fine china, and Carolina regressed horribly. After that winning season, they fell off a cliff and never even came close to such glory, and may never, ever again. But Panthers fans, for one season, you had one of the greatest and most fun years in NFL history. I remember this season so vividly. It was so fun to tune into Panthers football every week. And for those of you new football fans, imagine this team was like last year's Lions team, but completely healthy and dominant throughout the season. They were amazing. Cam Newton was so fun, and it's just a shame that it didn't work out. But for my money, there will never, ever be another team like the 2015 Carolina Panthers ever again. But anyways, if you like this video, then subscribe, because I got a lot of videos on the channel just like this one. And if you did like this video, watch this video I did a few weeks back on Dan Marino's entire wasted potential career with the Miami Dolphins. It's pretty good, trust me. And thanks to all my Patreons for pledging tiers. There's some exclusive content up there if you want to check it out. But anyways, until next time.